In this video, you are going to learn about the 5 most common mistakes worship drummers make. My name is Jake Goslin with Churchfront.com, an online resource for worship leaders and creatives. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and notification bell so that you continue to receive helpful content to grow yourself and grow your church. It's my strong conviction that the most important instrumentalist in a worship band is the drummer. That's because a drummer can really make or break the overall excellence, flow, and feel of the worship experience. I recently had Ben Blount of worshipdrumcoach.com on the Churchfront podcast, and I thought, hey, why not throw this on the YouTube channel as well? If you don't want to watch this long form video, you can listen to the podcast session by clicking the link in the description below. Hey, and real quick, before I roll the interview, I wanted to give you a heads up that the video quality isn't that amazing. Most of my content is in HD or 4K, but because we recorded this video using Zoom, which is an online video conferencing software, it didn't record it in HD, so it doesn't look that great. The audio's fine, but most of the content on my channel, as you probably know, is HD or 4K. I want to deliver the best to you, but I wanted to give you a heads up. I wanted to apologize. I'm sorry, someday maybe I can travel around the country and interview people with better video gear. But for now, this will have to do. So without further ado, here is my interview with Ben Blount of worshipdrumcoach.com. Ben Blount, welcome to the Churchfront podcast.
Hey man, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So folks, we have an expert in worship drumming here with us today, and I am super passionate about having really solid drums in my worship sets. It's some early on, as I was a worship leader, I realized how much the drummer makes such an impact on the overall feel of the band, and obviously the tightness of the band, and also just emotionally in worship, like making the right, playing the right intensity and dynamics to really just communicate what we're trying to communicate during a song and leading the congregation in worship. So today, Ben is going to share with us the 5 most common mistakes that worship drummers make. So this may be a session that you're going to want to send over to your worship drummer, or just share this info with your worship drummer. Either way, this is stuff that your members of your team are going to want to hear. Before we dive in, though, to the session and talk about the 5 most common mistakes drummers make, Ben, why don't you go ahead and share with us a little bit more of your journey into worship ministry, and also being, in kind of finding a niche in worship drumming, and why you're so passionate about that, and then also talk a little bit about worshipdrumcoach.com and what you got going there.
Yeah, man. My worship drum journey has been going on since I was about 9. Started playing drums in church with my dad. He was the worship leader. And man, from then, I never was able to take a lot of lessons or anything like that, but I grew up learning from Hillsong United. I grew up listening to all these old worship albums, and that's how I learned drums. So worship drumming has always been something that has been inside of me and something I've always been passionate about. I had the opportunity all through high school to play in different worship teams, different environments, whether that was a prayer room. I've been here in Tulsa my whole life, and I was able to play with some people at Victory and some churches around here. And then I was able to go to Oral Roberts University and play drums on the chapel team there. That was a huge blessing for me. I was able to tour around the world with that team, playing in all sorts of different venues, again, like maybe prayer services, but we also were able to play in big conference type arenas, things like that. So my journey has been so exciting and fun. And through all this, just learning so many different techniques. Like I said, I wasn't super technically trained, so I learned a lot of it as I went. I see a lot of people like that, so that's kind of built a passion in me, as now I'm a worship director at a church here in Tulsa, City Church Tulsa. As I have to now train drummers, I see that these experiences that I've had really can help drummers in the church. And that has led me to start worshipdrumcoach.com. I want to be able to give the experiences and the knowledge that I've gathered over the years to drummers, hopefully all across the world. I'm just trying to make resources available, make myself available. Just because, as I've developed my worship team, I've spent a lot of my time with the drummers. And I realized, man, it's honestly a couple things over and over again that I have to tell different people. Or when I go somewhere, I'm like, man, that's an awesome drummer, but I wish you would do ABC. And these are often the same things. So hopefully through today and even through some of the resources I'm developing, that we can get drummers elevated to that next level to help serve their churches, serve their worship teams.
Awesome. Well, excited about what you're doing, and excited especially to have you here again to share these 5 most common mistakes. And as you sent me over this list, and I was looking through these, and I'm like, yes, I've seen that happen multiple times. So hopefully we can, give some, I know you're going to be able to give some folks some direction and clarity on how they can kind of fine tune their drum playing and avoid these common mistakes. So let's go ahead and dive right into that. So share with us, what is mistake number 1?
Man, mistake number 1, I see this over and over again, is drummers overplay. We have a lot of amazing worship drummers that are recording right now for Bethel, for Hillsong, all the big guys. These drummers are getting better and better. Like the guys that play for Young and Free, they can play some wild stuff. Not often do drummers at the church level have that skill. But what I see a lot of times is that they'll overcompensate. Rather than break down a part, they'll play a really simple part, and then they'll overplay. They'll add a bunch of kicks. They'll add a bunch of snares, because when they listen to that part, they hear, oh, it's got kind of a busy snare. It's got kind of a busy kick. So I'm going to go, buh, 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 buh. But what I say is, let's simplify. Let's not overplay. And let's serve that song, serve the parts. I'll get into some things like feel later on, but man, stripping down and underplaying is always better, in my opinion, than overplaying. A big thing is that when you overplay, you're taking up space that other instruments need to fill. They do a better job at filling that space. For instance, if you're really killing a ride cymbal in a chorus, if you're overplaying that ride cymbal, you're taking up some space that acoustic actually really is suited to take up in the worship song, and you're taking that away. You're actually doing a disservice to that song, to that moment, because you're overplaying. So that's just kind of a little bit of why overplaying is bad. And I think the simplest way to do it is to strip back everything you do. Try to make it, if there's a really complicated kick pattern, find the heart of that kick pattern, play that. Find the heart of that snare pattern, play that. Play the heart of that fill, play that. So strip it down and do that well. Have you ever had worship drummers who feel like it's necessary to have a double kick pedal, and they're they're bringing it from their metal band or something like that, and hey, I want to have my double kick for this worship song, or it's just no, don't do that. Yeah, I haven't actually had someone do that, maybe a long time ago, but I definitely have had drummers that play like they've got a double kick, and that's really where this whole thing comes from, is you get to a huge chorus and it sounds like they've got the double kick pedal, and I'm like, what's going on, man? What's going on with your foot there? But that's a big thing. Honestly, metal drummers, people who come from a hardcore background, that's something I talk a lot about as in my writing, is that you can take those technical skills, but you have to strip them back. But man, they can actually be really great if you can rein them in, so.
Yeah. Do you ever find, this kind of is along the lines, because I mentioned the double kick pedal or something like that. Do you feel like sometimes the type of hardware a drummer has to work with, or just the amount of shells and all that stuff does influence what they're tempted to do? I guess my question is, especially if worship, you're trying to be simpler and not overplay, are you kind of setting your drummer up for failure in that by giving them like, you know, like 3 high toms and like 4 low toms and like a billion cymbals and stuff like that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Man, when I play live, even sometimes in worship music, I play with just my snare, kick, and floor tom with a hi-hat and a ride. The simpler, the better, in my opinion, but you're totally right on that. Is if you've given, as a worship director, if you've given your drummer 3 or 4 or 5 toms, like, what's he supposed to do with them but play them? What's the drummer supposed to do but play those drums, play those cymbals? Especially if you're in a small space, if you're just getting started, don't be tempted to give your drummer even 2 crash cymbals. Like, give them 1, give them a ride, and give them a hi-hat. You don't need a china, you don't need a splash cymbal, you don't need a bunch of extra percussion for that drummer to try to handle. Just simplify. Simple is better.
Yeah, and I'm about to I'm shopping around for a drum set for this church plant that I'm going to be interim worship leading at, and they're at the beginning launch phases, so they're getting all their gear and instruments. What's the best direction for me to go as far as the size of the drum set and the type of drum set I should be looking for a church plant? You know, set up and tear down every week. You know, we want something quality. We don't want to drop like multiple thousands of dollars on it. But how many shells how many toms, you know, how many cymbals? You kind of alluded to this, but maybe just say, like, if you're going to start with a new drum set, here's a really good solid start for a worship drum set. Yeah,
Especially for the shells, it's hard to actually find just a 3-piece drum set with kick, high tom, floor tom, and a snare. So 4-piece, depending on if that snare comes with it. Honestly, the set that I bought for our church is Sake drum kit. It's an amazing kit, not too expensive, but really nice. I have one of the toms sitting in my closet just because it came with extras. But no matter what you do, I would stick with standard sizes, like a 20-inch kick, a 16-inch floor tom, and maybe anywhere from a 12 to a 14-inch rack tom. You don't necessarily want to go smaller than that, even if it isn't a smaller venue that you're playing in. The snare drum too, you want to do like pretty standard. So you don't want to have like really tiny snare, really tiny high tom. That's just not going to fit any kind of worship music that you would want to do. But you can find kits from Gretsch that are really quality. Kind of in the mid-range is Sake that I would really recommend there. They've treated us really well. Great company and really great shells. And then for cymbals and stuff like that, man, I'll talk about it a little later too, like cymbal technique. But if you're going to invest in something, I would invest more in cymbals. One of my kind of philosophies with drums is that you can kind of make any shells sound good with good drum heads. Cymbals are a lot harder to make sound great. So if you've got $1,500 to spend, try to get a really great like ride cymbal, because a bad ride cymbal, from a sound perspective, it's gonna trash some really great music just because that cymbal may be too washy, maybe have too thick of a sound. Invest in those things. Also invest in changing your drum heads. Those are some things that they kind of go, they get overlooked sometimes, but they're so important from a sound perspective too.
And real quick, what are some brands and models of some cymbals that I should be looking at, and heads? So start with cymbals first.
Yeah, cymbals can get really pricey really quick, but like I said, that's a great investment if you can make them. Even investing in some smaller Zildjian cymbals, Zildjian is going to be great. I love the Byzance series from Meinl. Those are where you kind of get pricey, but man, if we had not invested in those cymbals, and they'll last us forever. Kind of a side note, they'll be around for a long time. That has changed our sound so much. But I always say, regardless of what brand you go with, cymbals, darker is going to be better for most stuff. Darker. Don't try to get a really thick cymbal. So there's some great videos from Sweetwater with the drummer from Jesus Culture. And he talks about his cymbals, and he really hits the nail on the head, is that thinner and darker is going to be better for worship music. And that's he put it into great words. What I've been kind of thinking for a long time is that those thinner and darker cymbals, bigger cymbals are great, but they do get loud. So, look for crashes that are 16 to 18 inches and a ride that's about 20 inches, but thinner, darker, those will be great. And then you said drum heads. Yeah. I prefer coated drum heads. So Remo makes great ones. Evans makes great ones. A lot of the ones that have a little more control. So honestly, you can just pick up the drum head box at Guitar Center or your local music store, and it has all their different, at least Remo does, all their different styles of drum head. Get something that's pretty dampened, and then something that's pretty doesn't have a lot of resonance as well. They have different like tone levels and warmth levels. So those will help, because those will take that drum, whether it's a nice drum or an inexpensive drum, and that will elevate that to a sound that you can really work with in any sort of setting. Those controlled ones, if you get a clear head, a really bright head, I mean, that's going to stick out a lot more. And if you don't know exactly what you're doing with the tuning, that can be a big challenge to kind of tame those drums.
No, that's great stuff. So, because I didn't even realize, you're saying the white coated heads are a little bit easier to control versus the clear ones are a little bit crazier to control. Okay. Yeah, no, that was kind of a selfish aside that I wanted to hear from, because again, I'm like in the market for buying some drums, but I also think it goes along the lines of you really want to set your drummers up for success to not overplay, like this first mistake we talked about, and even some of these other mistakes we're going to cover. So even just kind of getting started, I think I'm going to probably find like a decent starter kit, like what Gretsch makes, something around there. Get some nice Zildjian cymbals. And again, I'm picturing like a 4-piece, kick, high tom, floor toms, snare, hat, and then a crash and a ride. And that's pretty much it.
That's what you need. And, from there you can expand, but that's perfect.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Let's keep moving through these mistakes. Then let's go to number 2. What is the second mistake?
Yeah, man. Mistake number 2 is that drummers play uncontrolled. So uncontrolled, it goes along with that last point, but control is controlling your limbs, controlling your arms and your feet to play things, to stay under control, to not overplay volume wise or how hard you're hitting the drums. Control is everything when you're doing any sort of drum lessons or practicing. Drums are all about control, really. So the technique with which you play makes a huge difference. What I see this mostly in is cymbals. Just like we've been talking about, the cymbals can make or break something. The ride cymbal, the crash cymbals, they are the loudest thing on a stage at any given moment, unless you're dealing with like a 100-watt amp or something like that for electric guitar. The cymbals are going to be the thing that stands out. All my life, the biggest complaint coming from the congregation is the drums were too loud. The drums were too loud. What this really is a thing called perceived volume, and it really can come, sometimes it is too loud, but most of the time it's this perceived volume, this loudness of cymbals that makes it hurts your ears, that it's really piercing, it's really full. When you hit that big crash cymbal, or you're really laying into a ride cymbal, that sonic frequency is going to be very piercing to the ear. So with a little bit of technique adjustment, you can solve a little bit of that. Now, maybe you do need to just play a little bit softer. Maybe you're giving it 150% and you need to lay it back, but also add this correct technique to your repertoire, where a lot of drummers play with their sticks straight on a cymbal. Like, you have the cymbal right in front of you, you play it straight down on that cymbal. But really the proper technique is to strike the cymbal, and as you hit it, the drumstick actually kind of slides off at an angle. There's plenty of online lessons you can look at. I'm going to be doing some more in-depth stuff on worshipdrumcoach.com about this. But man, this little bit of technique goes a long way to help control the sound. Additionally, in control, you want to match your control between snare, toms, kick, and cymbals. Sometimes you need to play your cymbals quiet, but you need to play your shells really hard to cut through. Those shells are not piercing to the ears. Those shells fill up a lot and sit in a great place. So that being said, have that control to say, I'm going to hit my ride pretty quiet, and I'm going to slam my snare for this section, for this environment. Maybe you're doing a more acoustic service, but you're still going to have a full set. Maybe you're doing a huge service and you do need to play your cymbals a little louder. The main thing is be able to control your level, be able to control your technique in different environments. What I see is that players just kind of play however they want to, but this control is going to help a lot.
No, that's cool. I never knew you can just kind of tweak the way you strike things in order to even control that volume and not feel like a lot of drummers just feel like they're babying it if they have to play super quiet, and they're just like sacrificing their playing if they have to quiet it down for the old ladies who complain about the cymbals or something like that. So no, that's awesome stuff. That's especially, I'm excited to see you create some videos around that and sort of walking people through that.
Right.
All right. So uncontrolled, that's the second mistake. Now let's move on to mistake number 3.
Yeah, this goes along with these last two as well, but I'm gonna get a little more pinpointed. This is inconsistently. Drummers play inconsistently. And this even goes up to pro drummers. This is something that the best of the best do well. They play very consistently, and you have to practice it. And I would say this is something that's very easy to practice. So a lot of drummers can implement this right now. Playing inconsistently basically means, in this term, it means you're playing the snare drum at different places on the head. If you're miking your drums, that makes a huge difference. The difference between the middle of a snare and 3 inches off the middle of the snare, the sound that your sound guy is gonna get is extremely different. So play consistently. From that really small, almost nitpicky technique, take that to the big picture of a song, which is play what you play in rehearsal during your service. Practice, doing everything you do the same. Now, maybe you're in an environment where flow, it happens a little more, but if you're rehearsing something, you want to be able to serve your team and serve your leaders well, and that's a big problem that I've come up with, is that a drummer will come to rehearsal a little unprepared. They'll play it a certain way, and then on Sunday, maybe they've prepared a little more and they play it differently on Sunday. Or you come and they play it really great at rehearsal, and then on Sunday it's something completely different. Man, I have a lot of tips for this in general. One is making notes on what you're doing. Another is just to really listen critically to the songs that you're playing and come prepared to rehearsal. So those are two scopes of the same thing: consistency. With drums, it makes a big difference. Everything that we'll talk about, the drums are the loudest, the biggest, most harsh thing on the stage sometimes. And if you're not being consistent, there's no way to adjust that. The sound man can't adjust. The band around you can't adjust to make things better, to make things more a welcoming environment for worship. So play consistent.
Yeah, and that's another thought I never considered, is how the mics on the drums are in the sound system really is an extension of the instrument, and drummers should be aware of that. And it's totally it's not just your drums, you're actually working with the mics and you need to be consistent, but even that, but then also, like you said, I think actually if it's mic'd or not, you know, where you're hitting on the snare drum is going to sound different if you move it, you know, even if you're just going purely acoustic, and that's what the room is hearing as well. So great stuff there. That was mistake number 3. Now let's move on to number 4.
Yeah, number 4 is drummers often miss the feel of a song or a section of a song. Feel is huge. I kind of define feel as the dynamics and the rhythms going on, working together to create, you know, that emotional pull of a song. Maybe it's you're trying to get people to jump. Maybe that's the feel. It's like a kind of jumpy feel. Maybe it's slow and dramatic, but feel goes past the words 16th note or 8th note, and it goes past loud or soft, and you get into things or loud or quiet rather, and you get into things like this is supposed to be huge or soft or more descriptive in terms of an arrangement. And so this comes down to theory sometimes, like how you're playing, what notes you're actually playing. You know, take into account, don't overplay, but you have to be able to see the song as a whole, or the section as a whole, and understand what's going on. I'm just going to jump into my example because it's one that I think a lot about. There's the song from their last album, Faithful to the End, from Bethel. That song is a really interesting song. There's a lot going on during the intro. And when the drums come in, there's this dynamic. And when we do this song at church, it has taken a lot of work to get our drummers to a place where that feels right. And so what I like to say is I say, drummers, you got to listen to what the keys are doing. You got to listen to what the acoustic is doing. And if you listen, you hear that they're really driving. They're driving this 16th note pattern. But when the drums come in, they're just kind of like rocking along, maybe at like an 8th note feel. That feel is what's important. That feel needs to get you moving, needs to get you energized. But when you don't play it with an understanding of what's going on in those other instruments, that, oh, this needs to have a feel that's really quick rather than just this laid back groove, you know, that's how the song will get across the message that it's trying to get across. Now, I know feel is kind of an abstract thing, but we have to understand it as drummers, especially. And I think it comes down to critical listening. It's a really, really great tool to use, especially as a drummer. When you listen to the song, you can't just listen for your part. You got to listen to all the parts. You got to analyze it, and you got to understand, oh, this section is low, but it still kind of drives. And so that's kind of my practical example of that, is that 16th note feel versus the 8th note feel. There's a big difference, and there's a big difference in energy that brings to a song. Yeah.
That's a great example of that song. And I love that. That's one of the things that actually stands out to me with that song, is that groove and that feel. You know, it starts off with that like, whatever, you know, at the beginning of it. And then it just like they come in, the drums come in like the second time they go through the verse or something like that. But it's just like really just lays that foundation of that groove. But, you know, maybe a drummer might hear that and think they need to like play a bunch of 16th notes to like keep up with it. But it's like, no, those instruments are doing that. You need to like keep that solid foundation, that feel of the groove. And you said, you know, your recommendation is to have drummers intentionally listen to parts, and not just the parts, but like not just their part, but also like the whole song arrangement and what's going on. What are like technique wise ways that drummers can get better at feel? Sometimes maybe the words, but maybe what I'm talking about is sometimes just the finesse of it. And maybe that goes back to control. And because I've worked with some drummers before where like they can play on tempo like pretty solidly, but when it comes to just the finesse, that's the first word that comes to my mind. And like, and that's why I feel like it goes closely along with the feel of the song. How can you you teach that to someone, or how does someone get better at that? To just know, like, because to me, like you said, it's it's hard to put words to it. But it's also a very, like, whether or not it's on or off, like, or whether it's good.
There's a lot of different ways I could go about kind of answering this question. I'm going to go back to my description of what feel is, and it's dynamics and rhythm working together. So I think practically you should sit down when you're breaking it down and you're breaking down your drum part, or you're breaking your drum part down for your drummer as a worship leader. You say, okay, I can hear that there's 16th notes on the hi-hats. So that's your rhythm. What's the dynamic of that? Well, the hi-hats are pretty hot. The hi-hats are sounds like he's hitting them hard. So that's your dynamic mixed with your rhythm to make that feel. The kick, okay, he's hitting one kick every 2 measures. So that's really open, but he's hitting it really hard. Okay, there's your dynamic and your rhythm working together. And that's really what critical listening is for your part, is breaking down each piece, maybe even to what I just did, breaking down each measure and drum hit. I think that's a great way to do it. And it takes time and it takes preparation, but breaking that down to dynamic and rhythm together and seeing how those coincide, because you can play 16th notes quietly, you can play them softly, and that has a very different feel. I think when you mix those two things together, that's when you can create feel of a certain section. And I think that's the best way to describe it, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, especially as a worship leader trying to communicate that better to drummers. Finally, let's move to our last mistake, number 5.
Transitions. A lot of drummers don't understand the importance of the transitions between sections in a song. You'll get a drummer that, man, they kill it. They get that beat, they slay it during that verse. They got it 100%, and then all of a sudden we're going to the chorus and they get like one snare hit and then they're in the next beat. I've had this happen time and time again, where the drummer doesn't really help us transition between sections of a song. And it's so important. It's something that I really developed as a skill at ORU. What we would do is we would spend time after our weekly chapel services just playing spontaneously for about 30 minutes to an hour. So every week, maybe we'd do some songs that we had already known, but we would have to transition between parts of songs very fluidly. And if I, as the drummer, if I didn't help communicate to the congregation what was about to happen, that would really kill the atmosphere. That would really kill the vibe. And it wouldn't really get us where we wanted to go. This happens every week. There's a transition that could be better. Whether it's going from a big chorus into an instrumental, or a big instrumental into a bridge, or a big bridge into a low chorus or something like that. Man, that transition, that fill you do, or that build that you do, that's what communicates to your band. That's what communicates emotionally to the congregation through the music, that you're going somewhere. So all that to say, it's so important, because if you switch, honestly, it's not the song. It's not what you're trying to communicate as a worship leader to your band or to your congregation. Man, you have to have that anticipation going into something. So some practical things on that is that you, as a drummer, you have to know that although you are a follower of your worship leader, you are a leader. I've said it like 3 times. You're the loudest. You're the biggest on stage. When you do something, it communicates. That's why all these points are so important, is that you're communicating with everything you do, through this music, through your instrument. You're communicating. And so some things that you're communicating, builds are a huge one. When you start to build, that automatically gets people anticipating the next part. So maybe you are transitioning, but you started your transition way too early. You started your transition a little late. You just do a little bit, and you have to give people the right amount of time to get into that next section. Let's say you're doing a repeated section of a song. One thing you can do to help that reach its fullest potential is to make a longer build. Say, oh, we already did this part, but we're going to do something else. This is exciting. So where you start your fill or your builds, that really gives that communication to your congregation. Maybe you're doing a spontaneous worship type of flow time in a worship set, and you see your worship leader wanting to go to like the next section. Well, you can communicate to your band. Maybe you don't have a talk back mic or something like that to help verbally communicate. You can communicate that we're going to go somewhere by starting a fill, by starting a build. It says a lot from the drums. So yeah, communicate.
That's awesome stuff. Yeah. As a worship leader, I view everybody on the team, whether they're band or production, they're like important, but like the two people who like, I feel like if they're not getting their part right, then even all my hard work is kind of rendered useless. One is the drummer, like making sure, like, especially just from a musical standpoint, like you said, they are a leader. Like obviously I'm the one like running the show or whatever, but like they really make or break that experience. And then the second guy is the sound guy, and that's like a whole other conversation as well, because he or she is like super important to really bringing everything together. So yeah, I think for worship leaders, it's like, don't overlook the importance of really setting your drummer up for success, finding solid drummers in the first place.
Sure.
I mean, I'm like super picky about selecting the right guy or gal to do it. So let's kind of wrap this all up. So how do we put all these tips together? What's like one really actionable thing for drummers who are listening to this, or even worship leaders who can then communicate this to the drummer? What's one thing for them to take away?
Yeah, I mentioned a phrase before, critical listening, and I take that means when you listen to a song, you analyze it. Now that to make that really actionable, like you said, I say take notes. Whether you're a worship leader or you're the drummer, take notes as you listen to a song. Maybe you print out the chord chart or you print out the lyrics and you take notes. You say, okay, this is maybe what they did in the verse. This is what they did in the chorus. And all of these tips, all of these mistakes that people make and the tips that go along with them, kind of take them into account. Okay, can I play this part? No. What should I do here? Go ahead and prepare ahead of time with notes. And maybe you're not great at writing stuff down. Maybe you just go through and you make a couple markings. I love to do kind of a dynamics chart for myself. So I'll go through and I'll say, verse 1, I put that like a 3 out of 10 dynamic intensity level. That second chorus maybe went up to a 5, and then we went back down to a 4 for the next verse, bringing it up to a 6. In that, you can kind of map out, okay, well, if I'm going from a 3 to a 5, I don't need to do a huge fill. But man, this section down the road, I'm going 6 to 9, like a 6 to a 9. I got to get really big. I'm going to give a really strong fill. So whatever helps you analyze and execute the song the best, take notes in that way. But I just say take notes, man. I see a lot of people just come in guns blazing. They've listened to listen to the song once and they think they're ready to go. But I guarantee that if you take some notes and you actually sit down and force yourself to analyze things, you will see yourself taken to the next level just almost automatically. Honestly, I think it's a huge deal. I don't do it enough. I have to push myself to prepare ahead of time and take some notes, but the best musicians have taken notes on their charts and they know what they're going to do. And I think it's a cool tip that people can take away from this.
Yeah, even the best are prepared, and they put the time in ahead of time. It's like, oh my gosh, I've had so much experience with these like punk teenagers or young people, young drummers who are like, oh, I don't need to bring any notes to prepare. Like they, maybe they're just naturally they are really good, but then it shows where they just totally botch a section or screw up, and it's like,
Yeah.
put the time in. No matter who you are, like you need to prepare. That's awesome. So reviewing these 5 mistakes: number 1, they overplay; number 2, playing uncontrolled; number 3, playing inconsistently; number 4, missing the feel of a song or section; number 5, not understanding the importance of transitions between sections of songs.
Yeah.
Ben, thanks so much. This is really valuable stuff. What's the next step for folks who want more tips about worship drumming? Again, like worship leaders are listening to this. Maybe some worship drummers are also listening. But what's the next step to take for them to keep in touch with you and to find more of your resources?
Yeah, totally. I said earlier in the show, I'm starting worshipdrumcoach.com. On there, I've got a free guide, 3 tips to elevate your drumming. This is great for worship leaders to give to drums, maybe even just to have for themselves, and of course for drummers, for worship drummers specifically. I think I've got some really valuable stuff in there, some different resources that you can use as a drummer, kind of expanding on some of the stuff we even talked about today. And I think it's going to help a lot of people, hopefully. So go to worshipdrumcoach.com, grab that free guide and videos and blog posts on there as well. Hopefully a great resource for worship drummers and worship leaders to use to help elevate their teams.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time, Ben, and your wisdom and advice. Such awesome practical stuff here around worship drumming. So best to you, man, with worshipdrumcoach.com. And I just appreciate your ministry there, helping edify worship ministries, everywhere by supplying that info around worship drumming. So folks, like you said, go to worshipdrumcoach.com and download that free guide today on 3 tips to elevate your worship drumming. Thanks, Ben.
Awesome. Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Ben Blount. Please subscribe to the Churchfront channel. Hit that notification bell so you will know every time we release a video for you. Hit that like button if you found this video helpful. And finally, don't forget to share it with your other friends in ministry, especially your worship drummer, so it can help them as well.